to today's virtual webinar hosted by the Ecological Landscaping Alliance. I know we're all excited to hear from today's speaker, Michelle Chalice, so I will be brief. As always, keep an eye out on ELA's website for upcoming events and conferences. ELA requests that you complete the evaluation for this webinar, which is being shared in the chat now and will continue to be shared throughout the webinar. Now, without any further ado, please allow me to introduce today's educator, Michelle Chalice. Michelle Chalice is an environmental landscape designer with a master's degree in resource management and a bachelor's degree in landscape architecture. She practiced as a licensed landscape architect for 3 decades in Chicago, Illinois, and Madison, Wisconsin, before coming to Keene, New Hampshire to raise her adopted daughter. Michelle now owns Healthy Home Habitats, a consulting firm that works with clients in the Monadnock region, designing yards and gardens that shift traditional landscapes into habitat-enhancing spaces with a variety of native plants. She offers public programs on regenerative, sustainable, and ecologically friendly landscape management and design topics. She also offers hands-on workshops at the Healthy Home Habitats Urban Demonstration Gardens in Keene. You can find Healthy Home Habitats on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Again, please keep in mind that SurveyMonkey evaluation link will be in the chat throughout the session. And without any further ado, Michelle, please take it away.
Terrific. I'm so excited to be here tonight. I have this slide up here to communicate on this lovely summer evening that sometimes it's as though our yards and gardens, they're entertaining and they can feel pleasant, but it feels like something's missing. So tonight we're going to talk about plant layering. I'm so excited to have you here and to share this information. Amy Whitworth is a garden designer and owner of Planet Earth Design in Portland, Oregon. And she says plant layering is one way we can create a sanctuary right at our home and a sense of intimacy with the place we live. And she compares it to this notion of forest bathing that the Japanese use. So we will look at several of the different benefits of plant layering, things that we can do in our own yards and gardens. And I'm going to focus particularly on native plants to accomplish, as many of us know, the very important ecological benefits that they offer. So same location with different vegetation types, more diversity, more blooms, more habitat, and more seasonal interest. So who the heck am I? This is my first presentation for the ELA. I have a bachelor's. I think these things were said already. I'm an environmental landscape designer in the Monadnock region, and I am delighted to work only with residential property owners, helping them create places that they love to come home to with less lawn, more native plants, and more seasonal interest. So, first one, same location, different vegetation types. We used to think of our landscapes with one type of plant in different, almost separate locations, but we're learning more now about the multiple benefits of plant layering. In particular, this approach, mimicking nature, allows us to optimize several natural processes. If you think about it, photosynthesis, our innate desire for new stimuli, and nature's desire for diversity. This is a terrific graphic, which you may have seen before from the book by Thomas Rayner and Claudia West, Designing or Planting in a Post-Wild World. And it's a fabulous illustration of the different generalized layers. We have the bottom or ground cover. This is often being called the matrix layer lately, and it's the 2 to 6 inch-ish types of vegetation. And then we have that mid-range, the seasonal theme or perennial layer, and that can go anywhere from 12 inches to 3 feet and has all kinds of differences throughout the season. And then the structural layer. And this includes not only the tall perennials, forbs of flowers and grasses, but the shrubs, the ornamental flowering trees, that mid-range 10 to 25 feet, and shade trees. So, for example, We have in this slide a structural layer of a red oak, which you cannot see in this photo, the butternut, which does have a arrow to it, the Carolina allspice, which is that mid-range intermediate ornamental. The seasonal theme in this particular slide is bee balm, which is just coming into bloom right now, as you can see. Woodland phlox, which is behind this particular Carolina allspice. Bugbane, which has already bloomed, and Queen of the Prairie is behind all of these, loud and tall, just coming into bloom as well. The ground cover in these areas, as you can see, I have just introduced cranberry, but in this area is also wild ginger, bloodroot, and May apple. This is an area where I put down cardboard last year, slowly getting rid of my grass here at the demonstration gardens at Healthy Home Habitat. So it's nice to look at the layers here. So in general, it's easy to forget all these possibilities. And it's easy to forget that these examples are all around us. Nature does this all the time, particularly in our northeastern forest ecoregion, because the forest actually models what we're referring to as a design approach. And we have the ability to bring this aesthetic home to our yards for the type of peace and calm that we feel when we go into our forests. So for example, the perennial and ornamental tree layers. In this particular slide, I see the purple coneflower, you may too, or the yarrow. There's an ornamental tree here that maybe is pagoda dogwood. And variety, as you may have experienced in your own life, can be the spice of life in the truest sense. And that framing shrub layer, as well as that overhead canopy, is sometimes the piece we miss in more abundance, but they are the framing layer that we don't want to miss. So for another example, in this case, we have a phone cable or electric cable, but around that and softening that element in the landscape, we have for a structural layer, an apple tree, which isn't native. And in fact, I should mention that the native plants are shown in orange with an orange arrow, because it's helpful to approach the fact that these are not completely native landscapes. You don't have to start from scratch. We have the ability to modify what we already have. And in this case, a red mulberry tree has been introduced and will eventually exceed the height of the apple tree. And lower still in that structural layer is the elderberry in full bloom right now. And in this case, the seasonal theme layers are less pronounced. We have Boston ivy, which is slowly being introduced to climb up that electric pole, and blue wood aster, which in our area is a prolific self-seeder and finds its way all over the place and really has a wonderful cloudy, puffy character in the fall. Here, the ground cover layer is common violet, comfrey, and boy, I had something else in my mind and I didn't put it there. So may I ask, I'm going to ask questions as we go along here, because I know sometimes people have questions in their mind, and if they try to hold it till the end, they can't remember. So as I go through each of these, if it's all right, I'm going to attempt to answer any questions you might have on each of these topics. So right now we've just covered same spot, more plants, the issue of plant layering. Are there any questions that I could answer? If you would like, please type them into the chat. We're having a slight issue with sound tonight. And I'll say it's fine to type those in because I just popped this on you in the last minute. But keep in mind, I'll be answering questions as we go along. So let's see, Sharon has raised a hand. Maybe someone can type her question for me in the chat.
Absolutely. Sharon, if you want to come off mute and you want to ask your question, or Michelle is currently having some issues with receiving audio from our meet. So
Daniel.
anybody who can type their question into the chat, that would be the best way to go about it. Or
Aviva, can you have them type them into the chat? Yeah, I'm looking in the chat right now.
I was trying to
And
find.
I'm scroll down to the bottom.
everybody can find the chat in the lower right corner. There's a little I button, and then a little people shape button, and then a speech bubble button, and that's the chat.
I got it. Do you want me to type my
Thank you for your
question in?
patience. Sometimes
It would be great
technology
if you
works
could,
fabulously,
yeah.
and other
Or-
times it's a little bit more challenging.
Yep. Or if you'd like to go ahead and ask while you're off of mute, that's fine, and I can type it in for Michelle to see.
Okay.
Thanks, Peggy.
I can just type it in directly if you prefer.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Is Boston ivy native? Boston ivy is one of the Parthenocissus tricuspidata. And actually, you know, come to think of it, I had Virginia creeper on my mind when I was typing that in. Virginia creeper is native. In fact, we're coming to understand that it's an aggressive. So I probably shouldn't have had that in bold orange, because I don't think it's exactly native for our region, but it is in that Parthenocissus family.
Are common violets not native in your state?
Doesn't this require the bottom level plants to be full shade? Exactly, right? That's the catch. And I think in many cases, that's what has held us back from doing this plant layering. Thank you so much for asking that question, because once again, if we think about the forest, oak trees, white pine, cherry trees, many of our shade trees start out as a seedling underneath leaf cover. So at least for the canopy trees, they have come through time memorial being able to be shade adapted while they go through their growing process until a forest opening happens. And so I have found that myself. Now, the understory plants, yes, they do have to be more shade tolerant. For the spring ephemerals, obviously they're coming when the leaf cover has not come out. But for the rest of the shrubs and for the perennials as well as the ground covers, they do have to be at least part shade, and in some cases full shade. So this doesn't require the bottom. Yes, so our common violets, non-native, yeah, right? I was just looking that up today. We do have two varieties of violets that are native, but common violet is not. To me, they're better than grass. They don't require to be mowed. They have wonderful benefits for our pollinators, especially early in the spring. They cover the ground and prevent the sun from getting to weed seeds. Do I use ground cover everywhere? I am in process of using ground cover absolutely everywhere. I joke with my clients that Mama Nature doesn't like to be native, doesn't like to be naked. And if we leave her naked, she's going to put something there, something that's going to grow. So encroaching on other plants, work to make the ground cover so that it doesn't encroach on other plants. Now that's a little bit of the dance, right? And it's been fascinating to have different ground covers in the same area, and I let them figure that out. I'm sure you've had the experience where you plant something where it's supposed to grow and it really doesn't like to be there. Hey, wait a minute. Or you have something pop up in a situation where you didn't think it wanted to grow, but it does. So I am less concerned about it encroaching on other plants. If I'm not seeing enough of a plant that I want to see, then I'm probably going to try a different location for that plant, because my priority is to have the ground covered. How do you determine relative growth patterns, i.e. what will overwhelm what? That's a challenge, right? And we're starting to learn more and more about plants' general aggressiveness, right? And as well, how long they persist within a landscape, because some plants are meant for the beginning of that process. Some plants will last through that entire period. We haven't learned to categorize them that way yet. But as well, the rooting aspects, whether they're a taproot or whether they spread just under the surface, is an important factor. I wish I could tell you there was an easy source for that knowledge. I have not discovered it yet. Some people refer to this as their sociability. I like that term. That's a great term, whether they play well with others. All right, so more diversity, number 2. In the past, conventional landscaping is based on a fairly limited palette of plants that many that we remember as children, right? Yews, lilacs, roses. But as you very well know, our environment is in dramatic straits, and we have the ability to step up. I hope that you might be familiar with Douglas Tallamy. He's the author of several fabulous books. I have several of them here: Bringing Nature Home, Nature's Best Hope. These are wonderfully accessible books that communicate to us as regular old homeowners the amount of impact that we can have. And a really important piece of this is research that he has conducted with his graduate students that talks to us about establishing a percentage of native plants in our landscapes. As I mentioned, we're trying to start from where we already are, not completely redo everything, but 70% has been established as what it is needed in order to have a more intact ecosystem. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So, for example, and this is probably not a big surprise to most of you, conventional landscape, you can see at the top here. In general, and still we see this all around us, we have that ground cover layer as grass. We have the theme layer as annuals. In this case, you can see the vertical junipers as well, and there's some asters that jumped in there, and there isn't a structural layer. And actually, I put the juniper in there because that's as close as it comes. Now, even a landscape like that can be diversified. Not wholesale. This particular example happened over time, so that now the ground cover layer is the perennial geranium, absolutely a native. Creeping phlox, I still don't understand how that can be a native, but it is. Low bush blueberry. I was actually at this landscape today picking some of those blueberries. It was fabulous. And the seasonal theme layer, I tend to go for the whole season. So I do introduce daffodils. I use a lot of allium as well. They're both in the onion family and resistant to deer. There are also peony. I mentioned allium. Solomon seal is a wonderful native, very aggressive. So I'm going to mention that as we go along because the question has been asked. So I'll give you a little heads up of the ones that the natives that I will qualify as aggressive still have a fabulous place in our landscapes, but need to be watched out for. Hosta, aster. Some of the asters can, now we're not going to call them aggressive. And the goldenrod. There are lots of varieties of goldenrod that can be very aggressive, but it is one of the most important perennials in the seasonal theme layer for feeding our pollinators at the end of the season. And in this case, structural layer is a prairie crabapple. I'm from the Midwest, so I have a soft spot for some of the Midwestern natives, and there's an oak sapling in the background that you can't see here. And you know, maybe I will try to catch these questions as we're going along instead of being more formal. So here we have come over time to go from a conventional landscape to a more layered. So why is plant diversity important for a garden? This is actually the title of a recent article written by Kirthi and David, and they explain several aspects of why plant diversity is important. And for this particular aspect, they say that by planting a diverse group of native species together, we create a powerful defense against pests and diseases without relying on chemical pesticides. This approach not only saves money, but also helps in protecting the garden ecosystem and the health of the local environment. Yes, some goldenrods do clump. Off the top of my head, oh gosh, there are two that are nicer, that definitely have better pushability, and I'll think of them. So Improve soil health and nutrient cycling, another benefit of the diversity that plant layering brings about. I don't know about you, but I am having such fun incorporating food crops into my garden and landscaping in ways that I have never thought of before for so many reasons. Plant diversity also helps in preventing nutrition depletion in the soil and maintaining nutrient cycling by having that diversity. Plants which belong to different species have varying nutrient requirements. We know that we have some plants that go so deep that they bring up nutrients to other plants, and they have the ability to extract and add different nutrients to and from the soil. So Joe Pieweed really does like to be in a more moist situation, and that's where they predominate in the demonstration gardens here. That said, though, I do have one in an upland circumstance where it has shade, and so the moisture stays a little bit better, and it does all right as well. There we go. Thank you, Solidago speciosa and Odora, two nice goldenrod species that play well. Thank you very much. So the diversity involved in plant layering also, as you can probably imagine, creates habitat for pollinators and beneficial insects. Different plant species attract different creatures like bees, ladybugs. In this case, the bee balm here is a wonderful plant for hummingbirds because of its long, each different part of the bloom. And they also create habitats for these pollinators to nest, forage, and reproduce. As I'm sure you know, we're coming to understand in the fall, we leave these stems 12 to 18 inches for the bees that take 2 years to go through their cycles. The plant layering and diversity also creates better sensory experiences for humans. I hope that you may have had the experience of seeing or experiencing, a bee balm, a patch of Monarda, the red plant here on the left. When you do, please make sure you brush your hand along those leaves. That bergamot is so pronounced, and it is lovely. It is absolutely a secondary sensory experience as well. The milkweed, our common variety, has an amazing scent. I certainly didn't think of smelling milkweed throughout my childhood. And now, every time I walk by, it is wonderful. So the sights of colorful blooms, the sound of the chirping birds interacting, and the animals that interact with these plants and live in these areas can awaken our senses and create this calming environment. And it allows us to fully immerse ourselves in nature for a much needed break from our really busy lives. So here's another example of layering. In this case, the structural layer is a red oak, and I want to point out the host plant aspect, the diversity aspect. Red oak, as you may know, is for our ecosystem. Our ecoregion is one of the most important host species, up to 900 moths and butterflies, those Lepidoptera. Chokecherry is just below that, and it's still a very small tree, hard to see. It is a host plant for 4 butterflies and dozens of moths. When we go to that next layer down, that seasonal theme layer, the cutleaf coneflower, those typo there. Also, I'll call that out, cutleaf coneflower, absolutely fabulous as well, aggressive. If you want it to fill a medium spot in full sun, go gangbusters, but it will. At least 6 foot tall. It is absolutely fabulous to sit next to it with a cup of coffee, but it may drive you nuts if you don't want it to move. So caterpillars of the silvery checker spot butterfly and several moths. Blue wood aster, we mentioned that before, comes in on its own, is very prolific. At the end of the season, blooms with 112 species of moths and butterflies. Solomon seal, which we mentioned before, I could not find what it's a host plant to, but boy, as well, very aggressive, but I love that plant. Turns fabulous, those plumes turn fabulous gold in the fall. There are also clematis and comfrey here, and then the common violet as a ground cover. Let's see, in the baby Joe pieweed, who else is in here? Yes, where do you get your plants, anyone? Cape Cod. Boy, I tell you, the Native Plant Trusts, their nursery, Nasami Nursery, is to me the prime, fabulous, most fabulous place to get plants. I did buy the sterile comfrey, the Russian variety, because I was very concerned in relation to the next question. I was concerned about it spreading too much. And I have such a small place here that I didn't want that. So I have to admit I did do that. And I'm not in New York City, so maybe somebody else can provide you with some information there. So to that notion of providing some peace and calm, researchers from King's College in London found that people reported being in the presence of birdsong or birds reported better moods, relief from depression, and other mental health benefits for up to 8 hours after hearing a bird song. That's a long period of time, 8 hours, and a wonderful, now documented benefit from being in nature, in particular with regard to being around birds and bird song. So another wonderful quote. I guess it's not a quote. This is me. To my mind, the flowers that feed our beneficial pollinators, which form the basis of our entire food web, are the most beautiful of all because they have that aspect that is much more than just the color. You can see the small sweat bee is enjoying nectar from a black-eyed Susan. Rudbeckia are among one of the best bee plants in your garden for several reasons. I will say that they jump around. They're not a dependable plant to stay in one place, but they have big, what are called landing pads, or referred to as landing pads. And bumblebees, who are some of our biggest native bees, need a sturdy landing pad before they can settle on a flower. And this particular plant has the large lobed lower petals as well. Conversely, plants with many small flowers are really important for the itty bitty native bees, right? We have over 400 native bees in our ecoregion, and many of them are very small. They lack the long tongues of their bumblebee cousins, so they need access to nectar from shallow, exposed nectaries of smaller flowers like the goldenrod, oregano, and angelica. As well, the important aspects of the natives are that they bloom very early and very late, and we have the ability to put those in our landscapes, which is really important because we focus on the prime time bloomers, right? And they provide pollen and nectar during that period, but it's those late bloomers like the goldenrod that I mentioned, the asters, are really critical at the end of the season, and the early bloomers, such as our spring ephemerals, as well as our native dogwoods and blueberries and serviceberries. So may I ask, are there questions about diversity? Oh, even the non-sterile comfrey can spread. Yeah, okay. Be careful with comfrey, spreadsheet. Ooh, I want that spreadsheet. I'll have to get that later. Okay, any other questions on diversity? I wonder if I can copy that. Copy and put that over here. Paste. Okay, all right. I don't see anything at the moment, so we'll just keep an eye. So more blooms. How does this plant layering affect or give us more blooms? It has the ability, the capacity to lengthen our landscape's bloom periods. We just talked about that in a sense. And here's another example of a conventional landscape. Once again, we'll qualify it by these layers. The ground cover in this case was a grass. The seasonal layer were daffodils in the early spring, daylilies and hosta, and there was no structural layer. The after, approximately 4 years, now has much more diversity and layering. Now, this is an example where they are not native plants. or didn't start out that way. The ground covers are ajuga and lamium and dead nettle. Wonderful plants in the right location to not have to use grass. The seasonal theme layers, still daffodils, hosta with the addition of astilbe, coral bells, and daylily. A wonderful range of blooms, and now a structural layer of chokeberry, which are behind all these against the house. You can see the white area there, and an alder now is in that corner, and a baby oak has been added in the parkway that will be the highest structural layer for this area, with many more blooms and a much longer season. So let's see. Let's go back. We'll go back to that slide. And I have a link there about the research benefits to people reported from hearing birdsong. You might be able to Google that too. It's a university in London, but I'm happy to do that when we're all done. So in particular, let's take a look at those native plants and their bloom periods. This is a wonderful resource. I'm going to read this out so that you can look it up. It's a great handout per se, https://tkydn.net/NH0532. And actually, would be happy to share this PDF with folks when we're done so that you could find this information later. So native plants for beginners talks about the spring bloomers. We looked at the notion of the wild geranium, columbine. Down below here is the Solomon seal. And then we see in the middle our common milkweed. To the right is our native bee balm. To our Culver's root is just coming into bloom now, very tall, and maidenhair fern. All of these are native plants for the beginning of the season that are very easy to grow, that are not complicated. And it's important to know some of the easier plants to start with, I think, to build confidence in these in this endeavor as we go forward. So then for the fall, we have the asters that we had talked about. Little blue stem is a low grass, and this can be aggressive, but it has a most fabulous characteristic of the golds and even hints of purple. The grasses turn and their blooms turn in the fall. We have both the New England aster and the New York aster that do very well here in slightly different circumstances. And this is the stiff goldenrod that they're recommending here. All very sturdy, easy to grow natives that are great to start with. For low growing edging plants, do you have a list? I am finding that I am not edging things anymore. I have masses of plants, but I'd have to think about that. In the example you saw a couple slides back, I used the hosta as an edging plant, but I'll have to think about that. So another example of more blooms. When we take a photo, not everything is in bloom at the same time. So in this case, once again, the structural layer is that red oak. This is a baby red oak. The seasonal theme layer is a blue false indigo. And that's this bump back here at the end of that arrow. That bump will eventually be 3 foot tall by 3 foot wide. Let me point out that this is a parkway, or what we call a hell strip, and a wonderful experimental area for me to look at different ways of handling a rough spot. So the blue false indigo handles these very severe circumstances. It could be referred to as aggressive, definitely very sturdy, very deep-rooted. You don't want to have to try to move it very frequently. New England aster is a fabulous fall bloomer in this location. I tend to do a Chelsea chop. I just did that on all of my aster to make sure that it blooms as a lower plant and not quite almost 5 foot tall. The wild geranium blooms all summer. I do tend to cut that back a little bit after the first flush, but those fuchsia blooms on that mounding green foliage is wonderful. And the ground cover here has been not only the common violets, but garden strawberries. Just did a wonderful reel about being out in the street and picking strawberries. Now, I like those strawberries, but they're not grown for necessarily my consumption as big, huge strawberries. They're actually grown for everybody else too, for all the critters. But it's a fun way. I allow those strawberries to go nuts. They cover the ground, they provide a little bit of fruit, and they are in areas where I don't mind them being aggressive. Native ground covers, none for very wet soil. That sounds like a good idea. So a tool that I use that you could consider to staggering your bloom periods. I tend to graph these out, and actually it's coming to be something that I supply to my clients when I'm done. Graphs may seem boring, but they really can help us to strategize. And you may find these as resources elsewhere. I'm starting to see more of them. You can see a label here, Charney plant list. And the fun part about this is that when I create them, and you can consider this for yourself, is there's a column here for the common name as well as a column for the botanical name. And you can see they're blue because they are hot links. And it is great fun to be able to very easily speak with a client, have them click on that and see that Google search for all the places that shows that plant, hopefully through most of its different periods. Mostly they're blooms, but still. And then under the botanical name, there is the growing information. As well, there's the height, the width, and over time now I am putting in each of these categories when they are blooming so that I can keep an eye on my own designs to make sure that I'm not missing a season. I do tend to note the wildlife ecological value, whether it's native, whether it's fragrant, and some maintenance considerations. So I know the graphs might seem like a chore, but I find them really helpful. So would you provide slides and possible to see here? I would be happy to share this PDF when I'm done. Any questions about blooms? Euchra. Euchra is a great plant. We have native varieties. I use the purple variety. It's great fun. But Euchra is a good edging plant. So that would be lovely. I'll go on to more habitat. So inherent with the use of native plants is in plant layering is an increase in wildlife habitat because they're native plants. What a wonderful additional benefit, because these things are important. We know now that monarch butterflies not only depend on our different varieties, but they actually have preferential types of their plant that they get more nutrients from versus others. And I'll introduce two terms here just because some people may not be familiar with them. Milkweed, as you know, there are a variety of milkweed, and they fall into categories here. The first is powerhouse plants. And I've given you a definition here from the Native Plant Trust. And by choosing specifically these plants, powerhouse and keystone, we'll talk about keystone in a minute, you are kind of supercharging the amount of ecological benefit that these plants have in your layering strategy. And this is the result, once again, of research that found that certain plants are proportionally more important to these Lepidoptera species, the butterfly and the moths. So the other term is keystone species. These are plants that are critical to the food web in general, and they are particularly valuable to many species, multiple species that need them to complete their life cycle. 96% of our birds rely on insects supported by keystone plants. So how do you use that? There are actually guides. we'll look just for a minute for some examples and compare them to the plants that we knew as a kid, right? So lilacs. And I have these key color-coded: caterpillar host plant, or a plant that's bees are dependent upon. For the lilac, it is only a host plant for one caterpillar. And you can see we depend on it for its bloom in the spring, those lovely blooms and lovely fragrance. And here's what it looks like in the fall. Okay, so it's critical for one particular species. Forsythia, which is still a very popular plant because it's the first plant that blooms in the spring, bright yellow. It's just green the rest of the year, this middle photo, and it has a little bit of fall interest. So when you choose those plants, that is what you are providing for the pollinators in your area. Now, once again, when you get the PDF, go to this listing, because this is a list by the National Wildlife Federation, and they provide a list for the top keystone plants in each ecoregion. And they list it out by trees, shrubs, and flowering perennials, and then they'll tell you the number of each of these that the plants support. So I tend to use this as a guide when I'm choosing plants. These are important food source for plant-eating insects. They serve as a host plant. Because they're native, they require less water and maintenance once they're established, and they support more species, not only the non-native plants, but then other native plants. They're just more powerful. Wild Seed Project, wonderful organization. We'll talk about that. I'll talk about that a little bit. Great organization. What's the best time to do the Chelsea chop? Right now. Actually, a little bit before right now. End of June, early July. You're chopping it basically in half, and that delays the bloom period because you've taken off that top, but it also encourages side growth. So the plant is more lateral, less vertical, and so it helps it to be more full and less tall, and what we sometimes call as gangly. So cheat sheet, top native host plants for pollen specialist bees are ecoregion 5. Helianthus is the genus. Common plant names down the middle. And then the number of pollinators that rely on these plants. So these are all perennials. Sunflower, goldenrod, you have a name for two that are less aggressive than others. Black-eyed Susan, there are a variety of those. Aster, there are a variety of those. Willow, not a perennial. Got to be careful where you site this, at least 50 feet away from any sewer pipes going on, and certainly away from fields, septic fields. Blueberry, keep in mind that there's the low bush blueberry, which is actually shin high, and then the high bush blueberry, 4 to 6 feet. So all of these are very valuable, and more valuable even than other native plants. Particular keystone plants for moth and butterfly. The caterpillars, you probably know now that a mama bird needs 6,000 to 9,000 healthy, non-poisoned caterpillars to feed one nest of baby birds within the 16 to 21 days that they are at that feeding period. That's a huge amount of caterpillars, no? Right? That's a big job. So hawthorn, 156 of our caterpillars depend on this as a host plant. The native sunflower, 53, and then the dependent peas as well. So the New England aster, I'll say as well, is a host plant to pearl crescent butterfly. And the hawthorn also has very dense foliage, which makes a great shelter in terms of habitat for many bird species. You can see the fruit on the left for the hawthorn and the blooms on the right. Yes, make sure that the willow is one of our natives, not weeping willow. Good point. Black willow is a wonderful native. So bur oak, keystone plants are superstars. Any of the oaks are fabulous. This is a bur oak, and man, if you've got the situation to be able to have the scale and the space to grow one of these, they are majestic. Actually, all of the oaks are majestic. They are the larval host for many butterflies, including the hair streaks, dusky wings, as well as for hundreds of species of moths. But go to dogwood. This is a lower growing one that you see on the left here, but it has the ability to be trimmed up to be an intermediate ornamental. This is what it looks like during the summer, but in the spring, it has a beautiful white bloom. The summer, it has its berries and a fabulous fall flame, definite red, almost to the burgundy color, and a wonderful plant, very vigorous, and will send off lots of babies that you can share with other people, an absolute native and very valuable. And questions about favorite helianthus that is less colonizing? I have not found one. Has anybody else? Helianthus likes to grow, and so I tend to put it in spaces where I want it to cover. It's not a good use of my time to try to control plants from doing what they have come here to do. And so I'm really becoming much more conscious of siting them in a location where I want it to do what it loves to do so that it can be in its glory. Okay. More seasonal interest, plant layering and more seasonal interest. It is easy to think that native plants are boring, but this is only because that we have forgotten the amazing array of native plants that thrive exactly in our seasons, in our soil, and the other particular ecological conditions in our ecosystem. That means that as our weather is changing, they have more resilience, and we do have wonderful color that native plants can provide in our gardens. This is the purple coneflower on the left here. Now, granted, at least these first two are nativars, not straight natives. And they have less. We know now that nativars, which are a hybrid native plant that has shown a particular aesthetic aspect that we value, they grow that more, has less nutrients and can lose some of the aspects that the native plant held. I know that I planted a nativar of a purple coneflower very similar to this, and I found that during a drought period, it did not have the deep roots of a regular purple native coneflower. It had much more shallow roots, and that was a sacrifice that was made genetically when that plant happened to spawn this bright color. In the middle here, the purple cohosh or the black cohosh in this dark color, fabulous plant, is a nativar. This purple color has more anthocyanins than our native insects have the ability to use as a food. And I use it only as a highlight or an exclamation point, I often call, in a design because it is blooming in the fall with these fabulous, fragrant plumes in the fall. Our ferns on the right, these are native ferns. Ferns love to take over. Put them in a place where you want them to take over. They do this color just because, a fabulous gold color. And many of the hostas do this fabulous gold color, but they're not native. So we do have ways to have color. I do not see milkweed as a keystone species. Yeah, I don't know about the Minnesota's ecoregion. So you'd have to look them up to see whether they are qualified as pollinator powerhouse plants. The milkweed and the blue hyssop and the bee balm. I can't tell you that off the top of my head. So once again, comparison. Power plants through the season. Our sweet goldenrod, one of our better behaved goldenrods. Here's what it looks like. Goldenrod or Solidago odora is a host plant for 120 of the caterpillars, and 22 of our native bees are dependent upon it. Here's what it looks like in the spring, during the summer, and its bloom in the fall. Aster doesn't look like much at the beginning of the season, right? Looks a little weedy, but it's a host plant for 9 of our caterpillars and completely important for 16 varieties of bees, and is one of our last blooming pollinators. That is a fabulous way to end the season. So early perennials, early spring powerhouse plants. You know, for the people who still are committed to their annuals, the annuals aren't even ready yet, right? And you can fill that part of the season with these plants who are native and get started nice and early, not only for our enjoyment, for the blooms, but also for our pollinators, for nectar and pollen. So the serviceberry, Amelanchier, we have 3 varieties, at least 3 varieties here that are native. It's one of my favorite plants to use in designs. It has several different heights and can be used as an intermediate ornamental if trimmed up. Can go very tall, lovely light white, cloudy, not a bold white blossom, but a fuzzy, which I think is beautiful. Early berries, I would say that should be early summer, those berries. And I'll tell you, they do not last long in the demonstration gardens here. The birds just come and gobble those up, and in the fall, they are ablaze. You can see they go gold through the reds. Absolutely spectacular. If you have the place for a serviceberry, please use it. It's a wonderful plant. And the other one that I really depend a lot on is the wild geranium, Geranium maculatum. They as well have benefits and bloom all season. And you can see on the right the fabulous fall color that they have, the reds and the golds. And that's just a wonderful benefit. Wild geranium is a larval host for the leaf mining moth, Paractopupa geraniella, and the white-marked tussock moth. So wild geranium really has its benefit here. Caterpillars of some moth species feed on either the foliage or the flower buds, including Lacinipola laurea, bridled Archies, Heliasis viriensens, geranium budworm moth, tobacco budworm moth, Hamarocampa, leucostigma, white-marked tussock moth. Chipmunks eat the seeds, while deer occasionally eat the foliage. And keep in mind that we may not particularly have a fancy for these moths, but those caterpillars are what our songbirds need. So last examples here, I think spring, summer, and fall, a mix of our native plants. I'll provide you with these slides so you can see these plants better. Canada anemone, far left bloom over here. This is an aggressive, I'd say, ground cover. It gets to about knee high, 12 inches tall. It just is blooming right now and can completely cover a yard. And so hopefully you like that plant. Can interfill with a meadow as well. And can be a wonderful plant that we don't use very often and should be used with caution. In the summer, switchgrass, Joe Pyeweed we mentioned earlier, goldenrod and aster. And then in the fall, a shrub that is not used enough, Virginia sweetspire, Itea virginica, has our fabulous fall color, and the oak leaf hydrangea, which is marginal here. It's a zone 5 plant and can easily be bit back. But boy, if you can find a location where it is sheltered, is a fabulous plant. So in general, the native plants are healthier and stronger. They create the wildlife habitat in your backyard. They're particularly suited to layering because they come from those ecosystems. They help the environment. And because they're native, they are low maintenance. They do not want special soil. They do not want fertilizer. And they have the ability to actually add that splendor to your landscape. So Any seasonal interest questions? We're getting close to our end here. I hope I don't go over. And I'll just watch the chat. So someone mentioned the Wild Ones. Wild Ones is a fabulous not-for-profit. Nationwide, has local chapters, and they have been so gracious as to raise money to hire designer to do sample designs for individual ecoregions throughout the nation. So if you're on a budget, you can go to a Wild Ones website and download a sample design for your ecoregion. How gracious is that? And in fact, you can see here that they actually introduce the designers as well. And so it's a wonderful way, if you're feeling overwhelmed by trying to figure out which plants go where, it's a wonderful way to be able to tag team with a professional who has looked at least at the plants in your ecoregion. And then hopefully, I haven't looked at these yet, is providing some guidance on exposure. You know, when they lay this out, where is north, east, south, and west, so that you can understand the light aspects and maybe some comments as to the moisture aspects. What plants do you recommend for deep shade under tall trees? So deep shade, I tell you right off the top of my head, the pagoda dogwood has been absolutely amazing for deep shade. I just, I have in several circumstances been really surprised at how well it does. It doesn't mean it grows quick. Anything that grows quick is not what we want. Cancer grows quick. We want things that grow at a reasonable rate. But pagoda dogwood is great, and the amelanchiers are great. Strangely enough, the amelanchiers or the shad blow service berries, lots of common name, but amelanchier can handle almost full shade, as well as part shade and even full sun if they have enough moisture. But amelanchier and dogwood, pagoda dogwood, are the first ones that come to my mind. So the next organization, I'm sorry this isn't a fabulous slide, but hopefully you know and have heard of the homegrownnationalpark.org. What a fabulous organization, also a nonprofit, and a lovely place to find camaraderie for this adventure that we have embarked on of doing plant layering, and hopefully with native plants. You have the ability to register your property as soon as you plant one native plant. And the idea is that we are gathering together, all of us, to attempt to reestablish these corridors for our pollinators, for our wildlife, as our climate begins to change. And we have the ability to see not only ourselves on the map, but everybody else. They are doing this with a wonderful sense of humor. Whoever they've got doing their social media is doing a fabulous job. They're regular people like you and me who are telling their stories of what has worked and what hasn't, with humor and great creativity on both Facebook and Instagram. I highly recommend it as well. They provide all kinds of resources. So if you go to that homegrownnationalpark.org, one word, you will find all kinds of wonderful resources. And as I say, wonderful camaraderie. Ground covers for under trees. Wild ginger is a wonderful one. Absolutely. I have been in process of removing all of my English ivy. At the time I planted it, it was much better than grass, but now we know what a negative effect it can have on ecosystems. So I have been using wild ginger. I'm experimenting with others as well. I'm forgetting one of the names, but if you have not discovered the Native Plant Finder, so the Native Plant Trust has a website, and they also have something called the Native Plant Finder. And that allows you to put in the factors like, golden ragwort. Thank you, Pacera aurea. I've just done a big planting of that. That was the one I was trying to remember. And I'm looking to see how that's going to do. And so you can categorize, you can choose ground cover, you can choose shade, part shade, you can choose our ecosystem. It has all of these different criteria, and it's a database that you can then push go, and it gives you this wonderful list of plants that are specific for those unique characteristics. So it's the Native Plant Trust's Plant Finder, online, available to all of us. I'm going to watch these chats for a little bit more to see about additional questions. I will send this presentation as a PDF to our hosts so that they can send it out to people who have signed up so that you can see these web links. It's one of my favorite things to be able to share information that other people can pull up. Please, if you're interested in hearing more about the process of shifting, having your own landscape be more climate resilient, that's what I am doing here at these demonstration gardens, and I love to share how it's going on both Facebook and Instagram. So feel free to like and follow those, and you'll see what I'm up to from one day to the next. And if you're in the Monadnock region, please feel free. It's just great fun to do these free 20-minute consultations and hear about your landscape, what you like, what you don't, and sometimes be able to provide information that gets you going on your way just by that. If you use this QR code, it'll take you to the website as a whole for the homeowners aspect to tell you what services I offer. And I thank you for your patience. I've never done this before where I couldn't hear everyone else. It's a little strange, but I'm so glad that we at least got it to this point. SurveyMonkey, yes, please do, because it's really helpful for me to know. Wait, you can order your own lawn sign. Wait, I want to know where that is. Who says you can order your own yard sign? Own lawn sign and customize it. Oh, from Homegrown National Park. I haven't tried that yet. Absolutely. That's a great idea. And I haven't talked about that in this presentation, but boy, I'll tell you that signage aspect is wonderful. It really helps people understand your cues to care that this is actually something that you are consciously doing. You're not just neglecting your landscape. So I highly recommend that. There's so many options out there through through the Homegrown National Park and through other sites that you can order online or even just make yourself. And it's a wonderful way to communicate to others as well, to encourage them to potentially begin to experiment as well. So thank you. I appreciate it. Aviva, I'm going to wait to hear from you to know where we are. Oh, and if anyone has not heard of the Homeowner Association in, was it New Jersey, the couple who spent $30,000 on legal fees to change the law that now makes it possible that homeowners associations no longer have the ability to prevent people from planting native landscapes. And there are particular parameters to that. But I think this was in New Jersey, and it was a landmark case that I would really encourage you to go take a peek at. HOAs, boy, like I say, they have just been broached for the first time by this legal standing specifically in that state. Do I use irrigation of some sort? I absolutely recommend a whole sequence of steps for my clients to use soaker hoses after they have planted plants as a way with a manual timer to make sure that those plants get adequate moisture for their establishment period. But I do not plant plants that need irrigation. That would not, I'm not interested in that. I don't want to fight with water. I don't want to fight with critters, and I work around it. So thank you. I'm glad. Yes, please go ahead and say goodbye. And boy, Aviva, I look forward to talking with you sometime in the future, and I will send off this PDF either as soon as we're done or first thing in the morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. Once again, the SurveyMonkey is in the chat. please go ahead and fill out that evaluation for us. It shouldn't take more than a couple minutes of your time, and it helps us to guarantee even better webinars every single time that you come to us looking for content. As Michelle said, she's going to be forwarding her presentation as a PDF to us here at ELA, and we will include that along with links as well as the fantastic resources that you all shared in chat and some follow-up communications. I can't thank you guys enough for being such a fantastic audience and being so participatory. We really, really appreciate it. And again, just please make sure you take care of that SurveyMonkey link. Shouldn't take more than a couple of minutes. We're not going to track any of your data, and it really helps us to help you out. Thank you all so much. Please feel free to send an email to this email address if you have any extra questions for Michelle. Sorry, I'm trying to type and talk at the same time. Feel free to forward any emails with questions that you may have had for Michelle that you may not have been able to answer to. Get the answer to at that email address at the bottom of the chat. And again, SurveyMonkey. But those are all of the comments that I have. Keep an eye out on ELA's website for any new and upcoming events. And thank you all so much for joining us today. Have a fantastic rest of your week.